we need to talk about something that's really unsettling but also incredibly important. It's about those small, almost unnoticeable moments in a relationship that feel off. These aren't the big, obvious red flags. No, these are the tiny tests, the little probes designed to see just how much you're willing to take. Let's dive right in. They called you late, lied about something trivial, or checked your phone for a second. Why are the smallest acts of betrayal the most important? This is the dark psychological paradox of testing tactics, a deliberate strategy to map your tolerance for abuse. Now, this single idea, it's the key to everything. It's a paradox because our gut reaction is to let the small stuff slide, right? To not make a big deal out of nothing. But here's the twist. In this dynamic, the small stuff is the whole deal. It's not about the huge fights you can see coming a mile away. It's about the quiet, calculated experiments that pave the road to get there. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at what these tiny tests actually are and how they work as a kind of risk assessment for a manipulator. Then we'll get into the engine of it all, the abuse feedback loop. After that, we'll dig into the psychology. What drives the manipulator and what makes the target vulnerable? And most importantly, we're going to arm you with a defense, the zero tolerance, zero emotion strategy. This is how you dismantle the machine and ultimately break the cycle. Okay, so to really get this, you have to make a pretty major mental shift. You have to stop seeing these actions as just mistakes or them having a bad day. You need to reframe them as part of a cold, methodical process. It's about looking at the behavior not through the eyes of a partner, but through the eyes of a project manager conducting a risk assessment. So what are we actually talking about here? Well, testing tactics are, as it says, covert and intentional maneuvers. Those two words are everything. Covert means they're designed to be deniable. Small enough that if you call them out on it, they can immediately say, wow, you're so sensitive, or I was just kidding. And intentional means it's never an accident, it's always on purpose. Think of these as tiny probes, sent out to gather data on your boundaries, your self-worth, and just how committed you really are. This isn't just bad manners, it's a strategy. And this is where it gets really chilling. A healthy relationship is a partnership. This is a risk assessment project. And in that kind of project, your limits, your non-negotiables, they aren't seen as something to be respected. They're seen as liabilities. They're obstacles on a project plan that need to be managed, breached, and eventually just completely removed. Your boundaries become a problem for them to solve, not a part of you to honor. Every single tiny test, every time they're late, every little lie, is designed to gather data to answer some very specific questions. First, what's the emotional cost of disobedience? Meaning, what happens if I cross you? Do you get upset? Do you shut down? Do you do nothing? They're measuring the fallout. Second, they're mapping out your hard limits, not so they can respect them, but so they know exactly how close to the line they can get. Third, how much leverage can be gained. Every time you let a boundary slide, they gain a little more control. But the master question, the one they're always trying to answer, is simply, what is your tolerance level? Because once they know what you'll put up with on a small scale, they can predict what you'll put up with on a much, much larger one. Okay, so how does this all work in the real world? It's not just a bunch of random events. It follows a very clear, repeatable pattern, a system. This is what we call the abuse feedback loop. This is the machinery that erodes your boundaries. And this is it. This is the engine. It's a simple three-step process, but it is devastatingly effective. It starts with the probe. That's the tiny test. Then comes the most important part, measure and record, where they analyze your reaction. And finally, based on that data, comes escalation, their next move. Let's break down each stage. So step one is the probe. The manipulator does something that's a low-stakes violation. It's got to be small, that's the whole point. Showing up just a few minutes late, making a backhanded compliment that's almost a joke. It's designed to create cognitive dissonance in your head. You know that feeling where one part of you is annoyed and feels disrespected, but another part immediately says, am I overreacting? It's not a big deal. I don't want to start a fight over this. That internal conflict, that hesitation, that's the goal. That's the test. And while you're having that internal debate, they've already moved on to step two, measure and record. And believe me, this is the most critical phase of the whole loop. They are not just passively waiting. They are actively observing you. They're watching your body language, listening to your tone, they're noting what you say, or even more importantly, what you don't say. In this moment, they are a scientist, and your reaction is the single data point they came for. And your reaction leads down one of two paths, as you see here. On the left, if there's no consequence, if you just ignore it or you make an excuse for them, they log that boundary as weak. And here's the critical part.
A weak reading means escalation is now guaranteed. It's a green light. But on the right side, if you respond with a firm, factual consequence, they record that boundary as strong. Now, that doesn't mean they stop, it just means escalation on that particular front is temporarily halted. They'll likely just pivot and start probing a different boundary that they think might be softer. Your response literally writes their script for what to do next.
And that, of course, brings us to the final stage, escalation. When a boundary has been marked as weak, that becomes the new normal, the new baseline. The manipulator now knows they can operate in that space without any pushback. So that successful little test isn't just a one-time win for them. It's the launch pad for the next, bigger violation. The 10-minute lateness becomes 30 minutes. The tiny lie becomes a massive deception. The cycle just repeats, over and over, with each probe getting a little bit bolder than the last. So the big question is, why does this work so well? To really get that, we have to look at the psychology powering the whole thing. It's this fundamental clash between what's driving the manipulator and what's driving the target.
Look at this side by side. The manipulator is driven by a deep need for predictability and control. Unpredictability feels threatening to them. So these tests aren't just random acts of cruelty. They are a form of risk management. Their goal is to maximize their control while minimizing the risk of you actually leaving. Now look at the target. They're often driven by a desire to avoid conflict, maybe some self-doubt. Their main goal in that moment isn't to enforce a boundary. It's to reduce their own anxiety and just keep the peace. And those two opposing goals, they create the perfect storm for this tactic to succeed. So what's really happening is happening inside the target's head. When faced with one of these small violations, that desire to reduce anxiety just takes over. The mind starts rationalizing. You know the script. It's really not worth the fight, or maybe I'm just being too sensitive, or they're probably just tired. Every one of those rationalizations is a tiny surrender. It's a moment where you decide that the cost of confrontation feels way higher than the cost of just letting it go. And that is exactly how bounding erosion works. It's a slow, quiet death by 1,000 not-worth-the-fight decisions.
All right, we've taken the machine apart and we've seen how it works. Now let's talk about how to break it. Understanding the tactic is one thing, but knowing how to defend against it is everything. And the counter strategy can be boiled down to 4 very powerful words: zero tolerance, zero emotion.
The defense is just as systematic as the attack. It's a 3-step process. First, you have to get good at identifying the low-stakes probe for what it really is. Second, you apply the core principle: zero tolerance, zero emotion. And third, you enforce the original limit, and you don't get distracted. Step 1 is all about a mindset shift. You have to stop giving the benefit of the doubt when you see a pattern of these behaviors. It's about seeing these not as isolated incidents, but as a deliberate strategy. You have to train yourself to recognize that any violation of trust or respect, no matter how tiny it seems, is potentially a data gathering test. It's not an accident, it's a question. And how you answer it will determine what they ask next. Awareness is your first line of defense. Now, for step 2, the application. This quote right here is a perfect illustration of zero tolerance, zero emotion. Let me break down why it's so powerful. You were 10 minutes late. That is a simple statement of fact. There's no emotion, no anger, no name-calling. It's just a fact. Then, I am now leaving. That is the consequence. It's not a threat, it's not a negotiation, it's a calm statement of an action you are now taking. This response is brilliant because it does 2 things. It enforces the boundary immediately, and crucially, it denies the manipulator the emotional reaction, the supply they crave. You're not giving them drama, you're giving them a new data point. This boundary is strong. And that leads us to the final, critical piece of the defense. Enforce the original limit. The manipulator is going to try to pull you into an argument about the size of what they did. They'll say, "You're seriously leaving over 10 minutes? That's insane, you're overreacting." That right there is a trap. It's designed to make you defend your reaction. But your response is never about the 10 minutes. It's about the broken agreement. It's about the disrespect. The consequence is proportional to the breach of trust, not the size of the trivial little act they used to do it. Okay, so let's bring this all together. How do we actually, truly break this cycle for good? It really comes down to internalizing one core lesson and completely flipping the script on the relationship's power dynamic. If you take only one thing away from this whole explainer, let it be this. The size of the test is irrelevant. It is a complete distraction. The only thing that matters, the only thing, is your willingness to consistently enforce your limit every single time. Because if you only do it once, they'll see it as a fluke. They'll just test you again later to be sure. But consistency? Consistency changes the data they're collecting. Consistency is what rewrites their risk assessment of you. It's what flips a boundary from weak to strong in their own analytical mind. So let's wrap this up. First, remember that these tiny tests are not accidents. They're a calculated method to see if you'll break your own limits for them. Next, you know how the pattern works. The probe measures your tolerance level, and that measurement dictates the abuser's entire escalation roadmap. But awareness is what breaks the loop. By applying zero tolerance and zero emotion, you make confrontation consistent. And over time, this changes everything. You make disrespect predictable in its consequences for them. The manipulator, who is all about managing risk, is eventually forced to conclude that testing your boundaries is no longer a low-risk game. And that is what happens when compliance becomes more costly than confrontation. That is how the cycle breaks. You're not just enforcing a boundary, you're changing the entire equation.